afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Total War episode. Yes, you thought you were finally free of those, but no. Plenty of topics to cover, and for those who keep asking, I'm actually going to play battles and whatnot, I think the problem is basically I can't do it in a sort of decent quality and record it at the same time, so it's sort of going to be more instructional videos here, sort of more thoughts and ideas sort of how to help players get better at the game, reviews of sort of new content, stuff like that again. Nothing huge, but I simply put don't have the computer, so unless someone's going to offer me a ton of cash to get me a new computer or something like that, not going to happen. So my apologies. If you do wish to donate, link in the video description. But we're not here to talk about that, we're here to talk about wealth and agriculture. Or more specifically, how to make money, keep it, and make more money, and of course also ensure your people are fed. And they actually sort of play in together. I mean, food is a rather vital thing. I mean, it sort of plays into sort of maintaining, higher tier structures. They consume food. Military structures, as they go up, consume food. And of course your cities consume food. Your armies consume food. And there are some details there, of course. If you run out of food, for example, you don't produce enough, your troops will begin deserting. That's bad. Of course, it also means at the same time you can't reconstitute them. That's also bad. Just as importantly, it also means, for example, you don't get a lot of money out of the province. And while, of course, it might not matter for every province when it comes to certain things, it will matter a lot, because I'm going to introduce one of the primary things sort of when you are sort of working towards a good economy is basically deciding on what provinces are your money-making provinces. These are the provinces you'll put your primary sort of efforts towards increasing, well, their capacity towards. I mean, that's not to say you should ignore all other provinces, but when it comes down to it, these are the provinces sort of get any attention first. Anything else secondary when it comes sort of expanding. And then you can't ask yourself, well, are there any sort of provinces that make good for that? I mean, there are some factors there that play in. One of them, for example, tends to be, fertility, because again, that's food, obviously. But then again, when it comes to food, again, you have different types of farms, and that's where things get interesting, because again, some farms, of course, more suited towards food, others more towards making money. For example, sheep is one of the better sources of that. For example, for a lot of the larger empires, for the barbarians, I believe it's livestock, horses, and the likes. And you can get a lot of money out of that quickly in these provinces. In fact, that's probably one of the quicker money makers if you know what you're doing, compared to, say, for example, industry, which is nice, but it's also a lot slower. And at the same time, of course, it's also not really dependent on fertility, but again, as well, also you sort of go for the really fertile provinces, also because they're hurt less as, time progresses, the apocalypse sets in, and of course climate change sets in and all becomes less fertile. But even then, they're pretty good investments. In particular, early on, if you get any sort of rich provinces, sink money into them if you can. I mean, that's one of the better ones. For example, if you can also then combine it with, say, specific resources, that's even better. Marble, spices, salt, olive oil, wine, dye, you name it. I mean, those things are sort of also good things there, because they give you usually a bit of money. They usually also occasionally have some of them, depending also bonuses that sort of affect other buildings in the provinces, which is also something good to have. In that way you can sort of try and chain it together. So that, for example, is also a good thing. Of course, gold is also, pretty straightforward, and that's also one of the easier, besides, farming in a rich province, to sort of get a lot of gold quickly. And of course you can then sort of combine it with gems, take a goldsmith, you can even get more trade income. So in those regards, that is one of the easier ways, sort of, quickly identifying, what is a good province to focus on, what's a good province to make me a lot of cash. And again, that's really what you want to be looking for. And again, when it comes to those provinces, try to sort of focus towards that. You also, of course, want some good buildings to sort of keep order, because when you build up a lot of other things, they'll rack up public order issues, and you also get problems with that. That will also hurt income. That is one of the primary things to keep in mind. Then, of course, as the game progresses, you build your empire, corruption sets in. And that one can easily take out a lot of money. In particular, if you start as for example, the Western Romans, in fact, you'll have a lot of corruption right off the bat. So what can you do about it? Well, you've got sort of two options here. You've got your generals, who can usually sort of get some bits towards that. They can sort of deal the corruption bit, but that's only a small part. Some pieces can sort of get up some edicts. They can also do a bit, but your primary purpose or method of dealing with it are basically, if I can look, I believe there's a province here that has it on offer. That should be Spies now? Sadly not. But Spies, basically. Spies are what you sort of really want to be looking into in that case, because they can fight corruption. And if you can sort of begin fighting corruption, of course, that's great. Because obviously, I mean, that means less corruption. They're usually one of the better methods, about 20% off, which again can make a huge difference, for example, in certain provinces. And of course, getting good governors to sort of handle it also plays a role. I mean, they have all sorts of bonuses, for example, here. I mean, that one's good. For example, in a fertile province, you want to sort of set him up there. For example, you got this one, Azoristan. That's a rich one. Oh, we got this fellow. He's good with, you know, farms. Good. We'll pop him there. And all of a sudden now we'll get some sort of, you know, more bonuses that work together. And then, for example, you could say Pursuit of Truth to sort of fight corruption further on later on. Of course, right now, it's not so much of an issue. I mean, you're not going to see a lot of this. You can, for example, look at other things to sort of maybe work towards it. You know, the teachings of Zoroaster or something that might benefit something else. I mean, there are options there to keep in mind. But overall, sort of initially look to sort of identifying a few key provinces. Of course, the larger empires, it's easier that way. If you're sort of one of the smaller barbarians, of course, it's going to be a bit trickier, but then again, you sort of get what you sort of take initially from the enemy, usually the Romans, in particular, sort of right up next to them. And then you sort of look at what you got from the Romans. In that case, I mean, you usually sort of get something that involves a bit of salt and some wood, and then you take it from there. And again, you know, sort of small bits there. Maybe again not a huge revelation to some of you, but again, you know, to a newer player, I think this is sort of a thing that sort of give them, oh, really, I didn't know that, because I mean that's also something I sort of, you know, had to sort of initially figure out. I mean, again, you know, food helps with all that, and again, you know, try to look into it. And of course, some cultures like the, well, Sassanids, but also the Celts actually have structures like, for example, the camel herd here, which are actually sort of independent of the fertility, and they can actually give us some pretty good bonus there in terms of food as well, and even a bit of money there, so that's also pretty neat. But of course, not everyone has it. So those are little things to keep in mind. But overall, sort of keep that in mind, you'll generally do pretty well. Again, one of the simpler ones is just, you know, go for the agriculture. I mean, again, it's one of the easiest ways to sort of quickly gain a lot of money, sort of a longer period of time, if you play your cards correctly. Industry can also work, in particular, you can sort of get something that can sort of work with the other bits. I mean, that also works and sort of combine the bonuses. But again, it's a bit of a slow process. Farming is where you get your money quick in comparison. Industry, of course, is particularly sort of for longer term investments. That will sort of work out nicely for you, in particular as sort of fertility drops in some regions, which might already be sort of the best ones. But overall, this should hopefully give people a clearer economic aspect, how to maximize the profits for their troops and for other bits for up there. And of course, another little trick here to keep in mind is to aim for some research, because usually most armies sort of have something that sort of helps a bit with upkeep or recruitment costs in some regards. And again, particularly the upkeep ones are pretty damn good. I mean, for example, most of the western sort of ones, Romans, Barbarian, for example, have one up here, in fact, that sort of means you quickly get a 10% drop in upkeep, which can, for example, in particular as the Romans, with the starting big armies, help you give a nice bit of cash freed up for further purposes. I mean, those are actually also pretty good to look out for, upkeep costs, sort of bonuses, and then again, you also get bits here, for example, with their bonuses. I mean, try to, for example, raise their cunning as much as possible, as that also means, you know, less maintenance for some armies anyways. Seems like the Sassanids are not one of them. But again, there's all things here to sort of try and keep in mind. If you can do that properly, you'll generally find yourself with a pretty good economy. Of course, other tips involved when you've conquered an enemy, basically decide what don't you need, and then sort of wreck it, because you can usually recoup a lot of money. For example, the primary city centre here in particular tends to be expensive to sort of convert, so quickly cutting them down to the basic level can give you something cheaper to convert, but also just free up a lot of money for your other purposes, which also sort of allow you to sort of focus on your core provinces in that regard. So that's also a little neat little trick there. You can do raiding, but it's a bit tricky, unless you're playing the Celts, maybe sort of one of the more raid specialised factions. I mean, you're not going to get a lot of it for any time, so I mean, you know, it's a bit tricky there as well. It's not something I personally bother with. a lot. But over again, if you sort of keep the bits in mind from this video, you should hopefully have a stronger economy when you're playing the game, and hopefully also quick and factor to optimize it. In fact, with assassinates, if you play your cards very correctly, you can end up getting so much money you can't spend it fast enough, as I found out when I tried and very quickly got bored. So, there you go. Hopefully this has enlightened you a bit. Hopefully this has gotten you a bit clearer here sort of how to play the game economically. If it did, feel free to follow, share. Of course, I mean, there's many people who see this video, the better. And of course, subscribe. This is Imperial Dating to you, and thank you all for watching. Bye.